It all happened so fast. One minute I was gliding, feeling the chill air on my face, and the next, I was on my back. It was a family outing, a rare one, to a private ice rink Laura had rented out for Ben's 19th birthday. I used to love skating, I really did, but it had been years since I'd been on the ice. I remember feeling a little wobbly at first, holding onto the side, but then I started to get my rhythm back. The music was a bit loud, some pop song I didn't recognize, but the lights were pretty, reflecting off the ice. I saw Ben, my grandson, skating with his friends, laughing. He was wearing a dark blue beanie and a bright red scarf, an outfit his mother, my daughter Laura, had probably picked out for him. He used to be such a sweet kid, always so polite, a real tender-hearted boy who would bring me dandelions from the yard. He'd hug me tight and call me Grandma Evie. I smiled, watching him, thinking how much he'd grown. Then he was right there, too close, coming up behind me. I heard him say something, but the music was too loud to make it out. I turned my head slightly, and that's when it happened. A sudden, hard shove between my shoulder blades. I gasped, losing my balance completely. My feet flew out from under me, and I felt the shocking cold of the ice as I went down. Not a gentle fall, but a hard, painful crash. My right hip took the brunt of it, a sharp, searing pain that made my vision blur for a second. I lay there, sprawled out like a starfish, trying to catch my breath. The air had been knocked right out of me. I heard it then, the laughter. Not just a chuckle, but full, loud, mocking laughter. Ben's laugh was the loudest, a cold, unfamiliar sound that seemed to echo in the vast space of the rink. His friends joined in, their high-pitched cackles bouncing off the walls. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, trying to sit up, and saw Ben. He was standing a few feet away, a wide, cold grin plastered on his face. He didn't look concerned, not one bit. Just pleased with himself. It was a look I'd never seen on him before, a cruel satisfaction that chilled me more than the ice. My children, Laura and Greg, were right there. I could see them clearly, standing near the railing, holding cups of hot cider. Laura, my daughter, just stood there watching. She didn't move, didn't drop her cup, didn't even flinch. She just took a sip of her cider, her eyes on me, and then I heard her voice, clear as day even over the music. "She's always making things dramatic," she muttered to Greg. Greg, my son, just nodded, not even looking at me. He was busy scrolling on his phone, his face illuminated by the screen. No concern, no rush to help, just a dismissive nod. I lay there, the throbbing pain in my hip spreading down my leg. The laughter continued, a soundtrack to my humiliation. I was surrounded by a cacophony of sound, but it felt like the quietest, most isolating moment of my life. No one came. No one offered a hand. No one even asked if I was all right. It was just me, the cold ice, and their unfeeling amusement. The shame burned hotter than the pain in my hip. I felt like a spectacle, a joke they were all in on. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up. My hands were freezing, my elbows aching from the impact. I grabbed onto the railing, pulling myself to my feet. Every movement sent a fresh jolt of pain through my hip, but I wouldn't let them see how much it hurt. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As I stood there, leaning heavily on the railing, a voice echoed in my head. It was Dolores, my oldest friend, from a conversation we'd had just last week. She'd said, clear as a bell, "You see who's really with you when you're on the floor." Her words had felt a little dramatic at the time, but now they were searingly true. I looked at Ben, still grinning, still laughing with his friends. Then I looked at Laura, sipping her cider, her expression bored, and Greg glued to his phone. My hope, the tiny flicker I'd held on to that maybe, just maybe, they still cared, died right there on the ice. In its place, something new began to form, a hard, unyielding resolve. I straightened my shoulders, ignored the throbbing in my hip, and pushed away from the railing. I wasn't going to lie there anymore. I wasn't going to be their joke. Not anymore. The car ride back to Laura's house in Centennial was mostly silent, except for the low hum of the radio and the occasional burst of laughter from Ben and his friends in the back seat. I sat in the front passenger seat, next to Laura, trying to make myself as small as possible. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through my hip, a constant reminder of the fall. I pressed my hand against my side, hoping to ease the ache, but it didn't help much. Laura didn't ask if I was okay, didn't even glance my way. She just kept her eyes on the road, occasionally checking her phone at stoplights. When we got back to the sprawling house, still decorated with Christmas lights even though it was already mid-January, I limped inside. The cold air from outside clung to my clothes, and I could feel the melting snow dripping from my hair and coat onto the polished hardwood floor. I wanted to go straight to my room, to just lie down, but I knew I needed to take care of my hip. It was throbbing fiercely now, a deep, persistent ache. I walked into the kitchen, hoping to find some ice for my hip, or maybe a pain reliever. Ben was sitting at the breakfast bar, scrolling through something on his phone, a tiny smile playing on his lips. Greg was over by the fridge, rummaging through it, probably looking for a snack. Neither of them looked up when I entered. It was as if I wasn't even there. The air was filled with their casual chatter, plans for an upcoming trip. "So, for Santorini," I heard Greg say, his voice muffled by the open fridge door, "we really need to book those excursions soon. Paula found some great ones." Ben nodded, not taking his eyes off his phone. "Yeah, definitely. And the hotel looks amazing." I stood there, dripping on the floor, feeling utterly invisible. I cleared my throat, a little cough, hoping to get their attention, but nothing. They just kept talking, their voices light and excited, oblivious to my presence, to my pain. I moved slowly towards the freezer, wincing with each step. As I pulled open the freezer door, the cold blast hitting my face, I heard Ben laugh. Not a mean laugh this time, but a casual, happy one. I glanced at him, and he was scrolling through something on his phone again. He wasn't looking at me. They just didn't care. It hit me then, a wave of sadness so profound it almost buckled my knees. I remembered a time, not so long ago, when Ben would call me his hero. It was after his 5th grade spring concert. He'd forgotten his lines, stumbled over the words, and started to cry on stage. I'd been in the audience, and without even thinking, I'd walked right up there, whispered his lines to him, and helped him finish the song. After the concert, he'd run into my arms, sobbing into my shoulder, and kept repeating, "You're my hero, Grandma Evie, my hero." Now, he probably couldn't even remember that. Now he was probably mimicking my fall on the ice for his friends, making jokes about his clumsy grandma. The thought was a sharp pang in my chest, more painful than the bruise already forming on my hip. I found a bag of frozen peas and hobbled into the downstairs bathroom. The house was big, and I had my own little suite down here, a guest room with an attached bath that they called Evelyn's Retreat. It used to feel like a kindness, a comfortable place they'd made for me. Now it just felt like a place to stash the inconvenient old woman. I closed the bathroom door quietly, leaned against the counter, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes a little watery. I looked tired, older than my 72 years. My hair was disheveled, and there was a streak of dirt on my cheek from the ice. I saw it then, really saw it. Not just my own reflection, but what they must see. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a shadow, a fading presence, a remnant of someone who used to be useful. I had been a school principal for 30 years, a woman who had managed hundreds of children and dozens of teachers, a woman who had shaped young minds and guided lives. I had been a mother, a grandmother, a confidant, a provider. I had cooked countless meals, offered endless advice, and given financial support whenever they needed it. Now all they saw was an old woman who fell on the ice and made things dramatic. A shadow of usefulness, not a person with feelings, with pain, with a history of giving. I carefully pulled down my sweatpants, revealing the angry red bruise already blooming on my hip. It was going to be a nasty one. I pressed the bag of frozen peas against it, wincing at the cold, but knowing it needed to be done. I looked at myself in the mirror again, a new kind of clarity dawning on me. They wouldn't break me. Not quietly, not ever. That night, dinner was a loud affair. Laura and Greg chatted animatedly about their cruise plans, about the cost of flights, about what to pack. Ben talked about his classes, about a party he was going to, about a new video game. Paula, Greg's wife, chimed in occasionally, offering suggestions for the trip. I sat there silently, picking at my food. No one asked me about my hip. No one even acknowledged my quiet presence. I was truly the invisible woman. After dinner, I went back to my room, pulled out my old leather-bound journal, and uncapped my favorite pen. The page was blank, waiting. I dipped the pen in the inkwell, and with a steady hand, I wrote one single line, a silent promise to myself: they won't break me quietly. The next morning, the doorbell rang just as I was finishing my lukewarm coffee. I knew who it was. Dolores. She had called me first thing, her voice tight with concern, asking how I was doing. I'd given her a vague answer, not wanting to get into it over the phone, but I knew she'd read between the lines. Dolores was like that. Always one step ahead. Always able to sniff out trouble. She was 80 years old, a tiny woman with a shock of bright white hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been my best friend since we were 7, growing up in the same small town of Sterling, Colorado. She knew me better than anyone, certainly better than my own children. I opened the door, and there she stood, a thermos in one hand and a bulging manila folder in the other. Her expression was fierce, a familiar glint in her eyes that meant business. "Hot cocoa, Evelyn," she announced, holding up the thermos, "and a little something for our situation." She didn't need to elaborate. She came in, shrugging off her coat, and I led her to the small sitting area off my bedroom. We settled onto the couch, and she poured us both a steaming cup of cocoa. It was sweet and rich, exactly what I needed. For a few minutes, we just sat in comfortable silence, sipping our drinks. Then she put her cup down, her gaze fixed on me. "All right, Evie," she said, her voice low and firm. "Tell me everything, no sugarcoating it." So I did. I told her about the ice rink, about the shove, about Ben's cold grin. I told her about Laura's dismissive comment and Greg's indifference. I told her how I lay there, humiliated and hurting, and how no one came to help. I told her about feeling invisible, about their chatter about the Santorini cruise, about watching them laugh while I tended to my own bruises. I didn't cry, not then. I just laid it all out, a raw, painful truth. Dolores listened, her face unreadable. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't offer pity. When I finished, she just nodded slowly. "So he shoved you," she stated, not a question, but a confirmation. "And your children, your own flesh and blood, stood by and let you lie there." Her voice was quiet, but there was a steel edge to it. "Then it's time we make your worth visible again." I looked at her, surprised. I'd expected anger, sympathy, maybe even a suggestion to talk to Ben, to Laura. But not this. "What do you mean, Dolores?" I asked, my voice a little hoarse. She reached for the manila folder, opening it with a decisive snap. Inside, I saw papers, documents, even a few business cards. "I mean," she said, pulling out a legal pad and a pen, "we stopped being a doormat. I've already made a few calls. My nephew, Robert, is a fantastic lawyer, specializing in elder law. He's sharp as a tack." She pushed a business card across the table. "And I've been doing some digging. Remember all those years you helped Ben?" My heart sank a little. "What about Ben?" Dolores didn't mince words. "You funded his college trust fund, didn't you? Every single penny." I nodded slowly. "And his parents, Laura and Greg, they defaulted on his middle school tuition, didn't they? You paid that too, didn't you?" I looked away, a wave of shame washing over me. It was true. Laura and Greg had been in a tight spot back then, or so they said. They'd lost their jobs around the same time, and Ben's private middle school tuition was astronomical. I'd stepped in, drained a good chunk of my savings, and paid it off. And when it came time for college, they'd shrugged their shoulders and said they couldn't afford it. So I'd set up a trust fund for Ben, a generous one that would cover 4 years at a good state university, maybe even more. I had always wanted him to have the best opportunities. I just wanted to help them, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I wanted Ben to have a good start. Dolores reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know, Evie. You've always been too good for your own good. But they've taken advantage of that goodness for too long. You've given them everything, and what have they given you in return? Scorn, indifference, and a shove onto the ice." I pulled my hand away, a knot forming in my stomach. "But cutting Ben off, that feels like revenge, Dolores. It feels petty." Dolores leaned forward, her eyes intense. "This isn't revenge, Evie. This is rescue. For you. You need to understand. They don't see you as a benefactor. They see you as an ATM. They expect your money. They expect your help. They don't appreciate it. If they did, they wouldn't treat you like this." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Think about it. What happens when the money isn't there? Who's still around then?" Her words hit home. It was a stark, uncomfortable truth. I had always been the one to give, to provide, to smooth things over. When Greg needed help with his mortgage, I was there. When Laura needed a new car, I quietly slipped her a check. When Ben needed tuition, I paid it, and in return, I got this: a shove, laughter, erasure. So what are you saying? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I'm saying, Dolores replied, picking up Robert's business card again, we go see Robert. Not to cut Ben off completely, not yet, but to understand your options, to put things in motion, to start watching, observing who's still there when the money isn't, to see who really cares about Evelyn Rose Marlowe, and not just her bank account. I looked at the business card, then at Dolores's determined face. She wasn't asking me to be cruel or vindictive. She was asking me to protect myself, to finally see clearly, to stop being a perpetual source and start being a person again. A slow, quiet resolve began to settle in my heart. All right, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Let's go see Robert. The plan had begun. The visit to Robert's office was eye-opening. He was exactly as Dolores described, sharp, professional, and empathetic. He listened to my story without judgment, took detailed notes, and then laid out my options regarding the trust fund and my other assets. He confirmed that I had full control over Ben's college fund. It was still revocable, meaning I could make changes or even dissolve it if I chose to. He also explained the process of changing my will and establishing power of attorney. It felt strange discussing all this, like I was preparing for battle, but Robert assured me it was simply about protecting my interests. He suggested for now that I just observe, as Dolores had advised. And so my quiet performance began. I started subtly playing the role of a fading elder. It wasn't hard, really. I was already tired, already a bit forgetful from the stress. I just amplified it. I'd pause mid-sentence, searching for a word that was right on the tip of my tongue, pretending it was lost. I'd walk a little slower, a little more deliberately, leaning on furniture as if my hip still bothered me more than it did. I'd feign confusion about simple things, like the remote control or where I'd left my glasses, even when they were sitting right on my nose. Their response was exactly what Dolores and I had predicted, and yet it still stung. Not compassion, not concern, but annoyance. I started hearing the whispers, low voices, hushed tones, usually after I'd conveniently forgotten something or taken a little too long to get up from the dinner table. She's really going downhill, isn't she? I heard Laura say to Greg one evening, thinking I was out of earshot. They were in the living room, watching television, their voices barely above a murmur. I mean, the memory is just gone. Greg sighed, a sound of exasperation. Yeah, it's getting to be a bit much. I'm worried about her being here alone. Alone? Laura scoffed. She's not alone. She's living with us. She's the one who's never alone. Then the phrase started cropping up more frequently. Assisted living. It was always whispered, always behind closed doors, or so they thought. But my hearing was still pretty good, even if my memory supposedly wasn't. I heard Paula, Greg's wife, on the phone one afternoon. She was usually more reserved, but this time, her voice was sharp, frustrated. Honestly, Mark, she was saying, presumably to a coworker, she's just not a person anymore. She's an obstacle. Every decision, every plan, it's like we have to work around her, cater to her needs. It's exhausting. My heart clenched. Not a person anymore. An obstacle. That one really hit me. I made a point of not helping as much around the house. I used to do the dishes after dinner, sometimes even cook a meal or two a week. Now, I'd offer, a little vaguely, "Do you need any help with that, dear?" And then, when they said no, or even sometimes when they said yes, I'd just sit down slowly, feigning tiredness. They never pushed it. They just took on the tasks, usually with a sigh or a mumbled complaint. It was fascinating, in a morbid sort of way, to see how quickly they adapted to my decline, how readily they accepted my supposed helplessness. Every slight, every whispered comment, every dismissive glance, I noted it all in my journal. Who helped me find my lost glasses? Usually no one. I just found them myself eventually. Who complained about my slow pace? Laura mostly, always in a hurry. Who assumed I was gone from the room before I'd even left? Everyone, it seemed. I kept track of every instance, every tiny detail that confirmed what Dolores had said. I was merely a convenience, a silent fixture, a source of money, and not much else. Ben's college trust fund remained untouched for now. Robert had advised against any rash moves, suggesting a more calculated approach. "Let them prove your point for you, Evelyn," he'd said. "It will make your eventual decisions so much clearer, so much more justifiable." And they were proving it, day by day, word by word. They were laying bare their true feelings, confirming everything I had feared, everything Dolores had tried to tell me for years. It was painful to watch, like a slow-motion car crash, but it was also empowering. I was watching them seal their own fate, not realizing I was already a step ahead, not realizing their words and actions were being meticulously documented. They thought I was fading, but I was just watching, observing, planning. The tension in the house had been steadily building over the past few weeks, a low hum beneath the surface of forced pleasantries. My decline was now an open secret, discussed in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening, and sometimes, less subtly, right in front of me. Paula, Greg's wife, was hosting a dinner party for her coworkers, a big fancy affair with catered food and expensive wine. The house was buzzing with activity, and I mostly stayed in my room, a quiet observer of the chaos. I decided to make an appearance for a little while, just to gauge the atmosphere. I put on a nice dress, brushed my hair, and ventured into the living room where the party was in full swing. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and perfume, and the sound of polite laughter and conversation filled the space. I found a quiet corner by the fireplace, nursing a glass of water, trying to blend in. Then I heard it. Ben's voice, loud and clear, carrying across the room. He was standing in a circle with some of Paula's younger coworkers, holding court, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. My stomach clenched. He was telling a story, and I had a terrible feeling I knew which one. "So my grandma, right?" he began, a wide theatrical grin on his face. "She's like 70 years old, and she thinks she can still ice skate like she's in the Olympics." A ripple of laughter went through his audience. My grip tightened on my glass. "So we're at this private rink, right?" Ben continued, warming to his performance. "And she's just puttering along, super slow, barely moving. And I'm like, 'Grandma, pick up the pace.'" He paused for dramatic effect, and then, to my horror, he started to reenact it. He mimicked a slow, wobbly skate, his arms flailing comically. Then, with a sudden, exaggerated movement, he threw his hands up in the air and collapsed onto the carpeted floor with a loud thump, letting out a dramatic groan. "And then she just goes down," he exclaimed, dissolving into laughter, his friends joining in. The guests laughed too, some uncomfortably, a few glancing in my direction, but most of them just enjoying the show. My cheeks burned with humiliation. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter the glass in my hand. But I just stood there, frozen, listening to the echoes of their amusement. Then, Paula's voice cut through the laughter, a little too loud, a little too saccharine. She walked over to Ben, putting an arm around his shoulders. "Oh, Ben, you're too much," she said, then lowered her voice slightly, but not enough. "Honestly, she's such a fragile embarrassment sometimes. You never know what she's going to do next." She laughed, a brittle, forced sound. "We're thinking of getting her into one of those nice assisted living places. It's for her own good, of course." Fragile embarrassment. The words hung in the air, a cruel, cutting pronouncement. My own daughter-in-law in front of her coworkers mocking me, dismissing me, planning to institutionalize me. And Ben, my grandson, reenacting my pain for a cheap laugh. A strange thing happened then. I felt no pain, no surge of anger, no wave of sorrow. Just a cold, clear sense of confirmation. This was it. This was the final straw. They had shown me, unequivocally, who they were. And it was exactly what Dolores had predicted. I was not a loved family member. I was a burden, a punchline, a problem to be solved. I quietly slipped away from my corner, unnoticed in the general merriment. I walked slowly, deliberately back to my room, the sound of their laughter fading behind me. The dress I was wearing suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I went straight to my dresser, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the crisp white business card. Peter, Robert's senior partner at the law firm, had given it to me, telling me to call him directly when I was ready. I sat on the edge of my bed, the card in my hand, my fingers tracing the raised letters of his name. My mind was clear, my resolve unshakable. I was no longer mourning the loss of a family that never truly was. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman with a plan, a woman who was about to take her life back. Later that night, long after the last guest had left and the house had fallen silent, I picked up my phone. My hand was steady, my voice calm. I dialed the number on the card. Peter answered on the second ring, his voice a little surprised at the late hour. "Peter," I said, my voice clear and firm, "this is Evelyn Marlowe." "Evelyn," he replied, a hint of concern in his tone. "Is everything all right?" I paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready," I said, the words a quiet declaration of war. "Let's begin." The following morning was a flurry of quiet, purposeful activity. Peter had confirmed everything with Robert, and they had already drawn up the necessary documents. The first order of business, Ben's college trust fund. I had spent countless nights agonizing over it, the money I had set aside for his future. But after the dinner party, after his public mockery and Paula's cruel words, there was no doubt left in my mind. That money wasn't going to him. It wasn't going to enable a future where he continued to mock and dismiss me. I signed the papers Peter sent over, my hands steady. The $50,000 university fund, every penny of it, was redirected. It went to a scholarship program at the University of Colorado Boulder, specifically earmarked for students with no family support. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was funding the future of strangers who were truly alone, students who might actually appreciate the opportunity, unlike the one who had literally pushed me down. It felt good. A deep sense of satisfaction that settled in my chest. It wasn't revenge. It was a redistribution of kindness. My next step was securing my own exit. Dolores had been a godsend, as always. She had contacts everywhere, it seemed. She told me about Hearthglen, a small artistic commune nestled in the mountains of southern Oregon. It was a place for artists, writers, and thinkers, a community built on mutual respect and shared interests, not bloodlines or obligation. It sounded exactly like what I needed. No expectations, no demands, just peace and quiet, and the chance to finally be myself. I booked a one-way train ticket. A train, not a plane. I wanted the journey to be slow, deliberate, a gradual shedding of the old life. I wanted to watch the landscape change, to feel the miles stretch out between me and everything I was leaving behind. The ticket was for an early Sunday morning, a time when I knew the house would be quiet, everyone still asleep after their Saturday night indulgences. My packing was light. I went through my belongings, carefully choosing what to take and what to leave. Clothes, a few beloved books, my journal, a small box of photographs, a favorite tea set. I left behind the expensive jewelry Laura had bought me for Christmas, the silk scarves Paula had given me. They were gifts, yes, but they felt more like markers of a life I was now shedding. I left no goodbyes, no notes, no explanations. What was there to explain? They had made their feelings abundantly clear. My departure would be my statement. Sunday morning dawned cold and clear. The house was silent, just as I'd anticipated. I dressed quietly, pulled on my coat, and took one last look around my room. It felt strangely empty, already disconnected from me. My old life, the one tethered to this house and these people, felt like a faded photograph. I picked up my single sturdy suitcase, the wheels making a soft whirring sound on the hardwood floor, and walked out of the room. The front door closed with a soft click behind me. I didn't look back. The crisp morning air hit my face, a refreshing slap of reality. I walked down the long driveway, the gravel crunching under my sensible shoes, and headed towards the main road where a taxi was waiting, Peter having arranged it for me. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the houses around me were dark, still asleep. My family didn't notice. Not that day, not the next. I knew they wouldn't. They were too absorbed in their own lives, too busy with their plans for Santorini and their social engagements, to even realize I was gone. They would eventually notice the quiet, the lack of an inconvenient elderly woman to work around, but it would take time. And by then, I would be far away. As the train pulled away from the station in Denver, gathering speed, I watched the city lights recede into the distance. The rhythmic clickety-clack of the wheels on the tracks was a soothing lullaby, a sound of forward motion, of escape. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, I felt it. Air, pure and clean, filling my lungs like I hadn't truly breathed in years. It was like spring returning after a long, bitter freeze, a thaw deep within my very soul. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt entirely mine. Life in Hearthglen was a revelation. It wasn't a resort, not by any means, but it was exactly what I needed. My small cottage was simple, cozy, with a tiny porch that looked out onto a grove of tall pine trees. The air was clean, scented with pine and damp earth. There were no expectations here, No demanding schedules, no constant undercurrent of unspoken resentment. My neighbors, mostly artists and retired academics, were warm and welcoming, respecting my need for quiet, but always ready with a kind word or an offer of help. I spent my days reading, taking long walks in the woods, and simply existing without the crushing weight of their disapproval. But there was one more thing I needed to do, one final act of closure. I needed to write the letter. Not a goodbye, not an explanation meant to elicit pity or remorse. This was a statement, a testament to my truth, addressed to Ben, Greg, and Paula. I sat at my small wooden desk, a cup of herbal tea steaming beside me, and began to write. I wrote about everything I'd given them, meticulously detailing the years of selfless support. I started with the small things. The countless meals I'd cooked for them, the hours I'd spent listening to their problems, the comfort I'd offered during their difficult times. I listed the financial contributions, the mortgage payments I'd covered for Greg, the new car I'd helped Laura purchase, the entire cost of Ben's middle school tuition when they defaulted. And, of course, the substantial college trust fund I had established, the one they now expected as their due. I laid it all out, cold hard facts, not exaggerating, not embellishing, just stating the truth of my generosity. Then I shifted to what I had received in return. I wrote about the scorn, the casual dismissals, the constant feeling of being erased. I mentioned the ice rink, the intentional shove, Ben's cold laughter, Laura's muttered comment about my drama, Greg's indifference. I wrote about Paula calling me a fragile embarrassment and an obstacle. I described how they plotted my future in an assisted living facility, never once asking what I wanted, never once considering my feelings. I explained how they had turned my love into an obligation, my generosity into an expectation, and me into an inconvenience. I explained that the inheritance they had been anticipating was gone, that the college fund was no longer theirs to claim. I informed them that the house, the one I had paid for and maintained for years, would be donated to a local charity that provided housing for single mothers and their children. Not sold for their benefit, not kept as a symbol of their entitlement. It would be given to people who truly needed it, people who might actually appreciate a home. And then the most crucial part. I wrote that I was not missing. I was not lost, not demented, not incapacitated. I was simply no longer available. I was no longer available to be their ATM, their scapegoat, their punching bag, or their silent burden. I was no longer available to be treated with disrespect and disregard. I was no longer available to live a life dictated by their whims and expectations. I was simply living my own life, finally, on my own terms. I signed the letter with my full name, clear and unadorned, Evelyn Rose Marlowe. Not Mom, not Grandma, just Evelyn Rose Marlowe, the woman they had forgotten, the woman they had tried to erase. It was a reclaiming of my identity, a severing of the ties that had bound me to their ungratefulness. I sealed the envelope, a profound sense of peace washing over me. I walked to the small post office in Hearthglen, a quaint little building with a friendly postal worker. I mailed it without a return address. Let them wonder. Let them search. Let them finally realize the true cost of their indifference. This wasn't revenge, not really. It was liberation in prose. It was my final act of love for myself, a love that had been long overdue. Back in Cherry Creek, the letter detonated quietly, like a precisely placed charge. I knew this because Peter, my lawyer, was excellent at keeping me informed, and Dolores, bless her heart, had an uncanny ability to gather information through her vast network of friends and acquaintances. She called it her gossip chain, and it was surprisingly effective. The first news came from Peter. He'd sent the letter certified mail, return receipt requested, so he knew exactly when it arrived. A day later, he got a frantic call from Laura. She was screaming into the phone, demanding to know what I had done, accusing him of manipulating me. Peter, ever the professional, simply reiterated that I had full legal capacity and that my decisions were my own. He informed her that I had formally revoked Ben's trust fund and donated the house. That's when the real fireworks started, as Dolores so eloquently put it. Ben, when he finally grasped the reality of $50,000 vanishing from his future, apparently went ballistic. Dolores heard it through her friend who lived next door to Laura, screaming, shouting, throwing things. "He's raging, Evie," Dolores reported. a grim satisfaction in her voice, like a spoiled brat who just had his favorite toy taken away. He tried emailing me twice through Peter's office, as Peter later informed me. The first email was a torrent of angry accusations, calling me cruel and vindictive. The second, a few days later, was a desperate pleading message, full of empty promises and fake apologies. I read them both, then deleted them. Paula, Greg's wife, apparently spiraled into a panic. She had been so sure of her inheritance, so confident in her plans for my fragile future. Dolores heard that she was calling everyone she knew, trying to find loopholes, trying to figure out how to stop the house donation. "She's beside herself, Evie," Dolores chuckled during one of our daily calls. "Says you've lost your mind. Says you've always been a bit off." And Greg, my son, who always prided himself on being the calm, rational one, he spiraled into stress drinking. Dolores's network reported seeing him stumbling out of the house in the middle of the day, his usually neat clothes disheveled. He was apparently calling old friends, complaining bitterly about his crazy mother who had ruined everything. He couldn't cope with the unexpected loss of what he considered his due. The quiet assumption of my endless provision shattered. Peter arranged a meeting, a formality more than anything, where he read my statement aloud to them. I wasn't there, of course. I imagined them sitting in his plush office, fidgeting, red-faced, as Peter's calm, measured voice laid bare their transgressions. He detailed my years of giving, my attempts to connect, and their constant scorn and erasure. He read the part about me not being missing, just no longer available. Laura, true to form, accused me of being senile, of losing my mind. "She's not well, Peter," she insisted, her voice tight with anger. "She clearly doesn't know what she's doing." And Peter, with his quiet dignity, simply looked at her and said, "No, Miss Peterson, she found it." That night in Hearthglen, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping chamomile tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles. There was no screaming, no frantic phone calls, no whispered insults. Just the gentle hoot of an owl in the distance and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Peace. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd postponed for so long, a quiet, profound calm that settled deep within my bones. Their plans had unraveled, their power over me permanently revoked. And I, Evelyn Rose Marlowe, was finally free. Life in Hearthglen unfolded gently like a blooming flower. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet hum of purposeful living that was a stark contrast to the frantic, self-absorbed chaos I'd left behind. My cottage, small as it was, became my sanctuary. I woke with the sun, drank my tea on the porch, and listened to the birdsong. I joined a gardening circle, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for in my old life. We met twice a week, tending to a communal plot of vegetables and herbs. My hands, once accustomed to grading papers and signing forms, now found joy in the rich soil, in planting tiny seeds and watching them grow. My fellow gardeners were a diverse bunch: a retired sculptor with a booming laugh, a quiet poet who wrote haikus about tomatoes, a former journalist who had traded headlines for hydrangeas. We shared stories, advice, and the simple pleasure of working the earth. There were no expectations, no hidden agendas, just a shared love for growth and beauty. I found companionship not built on history or bloodlines, but on mutual respect and genuine connection. We talked about books, about art, about the subtle changes in the seasons. No one asked me about my past, not really. They accepted me as I was, Evelyn, the new gardener, the quiet woman with kind eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly seen, truly appreciated for who I was, not for what I could provide. I started to smile more, a genuine, unforced smile that reached my eyes. I ate better, enjoying simple, fresh meals cooked in my tiny kitchen, often with vegetables from our communal garden. The pain in my hip, though still a distant memory, no longer governed my movements or my thoughts. I felt lighter, freer, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. And never once, not a single time, did I feel erased. Here, I was a person, a valuable member of a community, someone whose presence was welcomed and celebrated. One afternoon, as I was tending to a row of budding basil plants, the journalist from the gardening circle, a woman named Clara with kind, inquisitive eyes, sat down beside me. "Evelyn," she said, her voice soft, "if you don't mind me asking, what made you decide to leave your old life behind and come here?" I paused, carefully plucking a tiny weed from the soil. I thought about the ice rink, about the constant dismissals, about the letter, but I didn't speak of any of that. The pain was gone, transformed into a quiet understanding. Because, I replied, looking at her, a peaceful smile on my face, I still had time, and I wanted it to be mine. Clara nodded slowly, her eyes understanding. That's a beautiful reason, she said. A few weeks later, a local artist in Hearthglen, a young woman named Lily, who painted vibrant portraits of the community members, approached me. Evelyn, she said shyly, I was wondering if I could paint your portrait. There's something about your peace, your strength. I'd love to capture it. I looked at her earnest face, and a warmth spread through me. For so long, I had been invisible, a shadow. Now someone wanted to paint me. Someone saw me. I nodded, a quiet joy welling up inside. I would be honored, Lily, I said. The painting, when it was finished, was full of light and life, capturing the quiet determination in my eyes, the gentle curve of a smile. It was the only portrait of myself I had ever truly loved. I didn't miss my family. I missed who I used to be. The woman I had been before their neglect had overshadowed me. And now, in this quiet haven, among strangers who felt more like family, I had found her again. Weeks turned into months, and my new life in Hearthglen solidified into a comforting routine. I still received updates from Peter, always brief and to the point. He informed me that Greg and Paula had finally stopped contesting my decisions. The initial shock and outrage had apparently given way to a bitter resignation. They had realized, perhaps, that there was no legal recourse, no way to force me to give them what I no longer wished to provide. The house was successfully donated to the charity, and the scholarship fund was already accepting applications. Ben, however, remained persistent in his own way. Peter told me he'd tried emailing me twice more through his office after the initial angry and begging messages. Once, he claimed to be worried about my mental health and wanted to check in. The second time, he tried to play the victim, saying he was struggling financially and that I had ruined his future. Both emails remained unanswered. Peter simply informed him that I was well and wished to have no further contact. It was a firm boundary, one I had erected with great care, and I had no intention of letting them breach it. A peculiar request came through Peter's office one afternoon. A journalist from a prominent national magazine was working on a story about older women who had significantly changed their wills late in life, often diverting inheritances from ungrateful family members to charities or new causes. She had heard whispers of my story through some legal contacts and wanted to interview me. I politely declined. My story wasn't for public consumption, not in that way. It wasn't about sensationalism or drama. It was about quiet reclamation, about finding peace. My will was a reflection of my new life, my new values. It no longer funded bloodlines that had proven themselves unworthy. Instead, it was now dedicated to funding apprenticeships for young artists and writers here in Hearthglen, to support the very community that had welcomed me, that had allowed me to bloom. It was a legacy of creation, of support for passion, not an inheritance based on obligation or expectation. One evening, I sat in my cozy living room, a soft lamp casting a warm glow. I looked at the old family portrait that had sat on my mantelpiece for years. A smiling Laura, a stern Greg, a young, innocent Ben, and myself looking tired but trying to hold them all together. It no longer sparked warmth or nostalgia. It felt like a relic from a different life, a testament to a broken past. I carefully took it down. In its place, I hung a beautiful canvas Lily had painted, a vibrant explosion of wildflowers from the nearby meadows. It was a riot of color, full of life and untamed beauty. I stood back admiring it, a quiet smile on my face. This was my legacy now. Not the faded faces of those who had tried to diminish me, but the vibrant, resilient beauty of nature, of growth, of new beginnings. It was the only legacy I wanted to nurture, the only garden I truly cared to tend. My story didn't end with a battle. It ended with a boundary, a quiet victory, and the profound, enduring peace of a life finally lived on my own terms,